Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, let's return now to that reshuffle that Theresa May carried out within her top team yesterday. And despite predictions that Amber Rudd, Jeremy Hunt and Chris Grayling could all be moved from their roles, in the end, the Prime Minister made very few changes to her cabinet, with the most notable departure being that of Justine Greening as Education Secretary. Well, joining me now to discuss the success or the failure of the reshuffle is John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent. Good afternoon to you. First of all, your evaluation, was it a shambles or decent?
No, I mean, I did try to formulate a case before I came on for defending the Prime Minister, but I couldn't actually do it. It is a shambles. A shambles was originally it was a board for displaying meat on in a meat market. And that's a very good description of this reshuffle. It just exposes the inner guts of this government because it took so long, it was so difficult, and it was all almost conducted in public. I mean, because we knew that Jeremy Hunt and Justine Greening were refusing to move as the Prime Minister wanted them to. Justine Greening left the government and Jeremy Hunt got a new brass plate on his office. So, yeah, it has not been a success for the government. It was supposed to be the chance for Theresa May to impose her authority on the government, and instead she's undermined it.
Is it a sign that there could be yet more problems to come for Theresa May?
Well, yes, I mean, because it does indicate, I mean, reshuffles are supposed to be the maximum moment of prime ministerial power because, I mean, prime ministers in the British Constitution don't actually have many direct powers. One of the powers they have is to hire and fire ministers. And if a prime minister can't even do that freely, then they really are circumscribed. And so, Theresa May, we have seen since the election, has been, in George Osborne's colourful phrase, a dead woman walking. She hasn't been able to assert her authority much over the government. She managed to get through a budget last year without any serious mishap, and that was acclaimed as a triumph. She managed to secure, significant progress in the Brexit talks. That was acclaimed as a triumph, but she still doesn't actually have the authority to have her writ run in government, and that's going to continue.
Well, I suppose she has had a number of problems over the last 12 months or so, but yet she keeps dusting herself off and getting back up.
Yes, I mean, she will earn some credit, I think, in the bank of public opinion for just simply carrying on. And she does, I mean, despite all her difficulties and her problems, which have been so illustrated over the past 24 hours, the Conservative Party does not want to replace her with anybody else. So she is secure in her relative powerlessness for the next 18 months or so. I mean, she will be, unless she wants to just sort of back up and go, she will be the Prime Minister who takes us out of the European Union. She will be there on March 2019 if she wants to be.
Let's talk about Justine Greening, because she obviously didn't want the post that she was offered. Jeremy Hunt managed to persuade Theresa May that he could stay on in his health role, albeit with a different name. How did he manage that, yet Justine Greening didn't?
Well, I think Theresa May likes Jeremy Hunt and trusts him. She doesn't like or trust Justine Greening. I mean, if one believes the briefings that we read in the papers, because I mean, I've got no direct knowledge of this, but Justine Greening was supposed to be difficult for the Prime Minister. Theresa May didn't get on with her, didn't have much sympathy for her, thought she talked too much in cabinet meetings, if we believe what we read. Whereas Jeremy Hunt, actually, Theresa May wanted to make him the Damon Green role, wanted to give him that role in charge of all the cabinet committees, in effect her deputy. And Jeremy Hunt didn't want to do that, so Theresa May wanted him to move to the business department, but he resisted that because he saw that as a demotion. OK, John Rentoul, thanks so much for your thoughts.
First today, let's take a look at how the papers reacted to the cabinet reshuffle, and it won't make happy reading in Downing Street. The Times leads on the resignation of Justine Greening, calling the reshuffle shambolic and saying it laid bare Theresa May's lack of authority. The Guardian also highlights Ms Greening's departure and says the Prime Minister has been accused of giving in to the boys after Jeremy Hunt refused to move from Health Secretary to the Business Department. Mr Hunt's refusal also leads the Mail. The paper says Theresa May's reshuffle plans were torpedoed, including her alleged desire to remove former leadership rival Andrea Leadsom from the cabinet. And the Daily Telegraph recalls Harold Macmillan's Night of the Long Knives by describing this reshuffle as a false start, the night of the blunt stiletto. Well, we're joined now by our political editor, Laura Kunsberg. It was never billed as being a completely dramatic reshuffle, but actually the papers have concluded it was a completely damp squib. Do you agree?
Well, I think it certainly was bungled in some aspects. And as you say, there was never meant to be big and dramatic, but there was quite a lot of drama. But the drama was unintentional because ministers, as they sometimes do in reshuffles, even when prime ministers are at the peak of their powers, ministers just did not like what they were being offered. And there's a pretty basic question here. If Downing Street doesn't actually properly do their homework, test the waters with ministers over would they be willing to move or not, this is what happens. They end up with something that looks like it went off half-cocked. They end up sitting around the cabinet table this morning with Theresa May looking at colleagues that she didn't want to be in those seats. And it has also made a lot of serving people in the government, not just Tory MPs, quite disgruntled, particularly at how Justine Greening was treated. Now, she is somebody who's very determined. She's very robust. Somebody told me yesterday, originally, when she was offered the job of being Secretary of State for Department of International Development under David Cameron, she was so cross that she staged a sit-in in number 10 and then eventually accepted the job. So, you know, she's somebody who knows her own mind. She has form and she's very, very determined. But the question that lots of Tory MPs are asking this morning is why was Jeremy Hunt allowed to argue for his job and stay in post?
Which he did for hours, apparently.
It was about an hour and a half, but he went in the light and emerged in the dark. And Justine Greening was not allowed to do the same. And I think over time, it could well be that Justine Greening becomes somebody who's rather useful to people like Lord Malach Brown today. She's a prominent Remainer, somebody who's won a London marginal seat. Not very many of them in the Tory party these days. So that could be storing up trouble for the future. But today's very important too.
Right. I mean, before we go on to the other moves and what it says about Theresa May's authority, just briefly then ending on Justine Greening, do you think she will join the ranks of what have been described as some people find rather offensively mutineers on the backbenches? I
think she'll be very careful about what she does next. Now, the thing that she says she cares about most is social mobility. That's why she wanted to stay in that job. Her social mobility. She's the first comprehensively educated education secretary, and she only launched her social mobility strategy less even than a month ago. So the ink's hardly dry on what was a very big piece of work that she put forward that was meant to work in tandem with Theresa May's stated goal of making the country work for everyone. So she cares very deeply about that, and from conversations with those who understand her thinking, she wants to make that her focus. But that said, she is somebody who also cares very much about our future relationship with the European Union, and it may well be that some of her former colleagues managed to entice her to be on the backbenches with those group of awkwards, Ramoners, or people who are making a robust case, depending how you want to describe them.
What about Theresa May's authority? Because reshuffles are, as you say, historically they can be very difficult.
Absolutely.
People don't always move. But what does this say about a government which billed this as rejuvenating, rebooting, starting the new year on a fresh footing, and she hasn't been able to do the things she wanted?
I think she had the authority to try to make her moves, and that wasn't the case in the back half of last year. The back half of last year, she wasn't even strong enough to have a go at doing all of this. I think what they discovered yesterday is that she wasn't strong enough to be able to deliver exactly what she wanted. I mean, there's just simply that is a matter of fact, because suggestions that she made did not come to pass. Today, however, is important, maybe not so much to the public perception, because frankly there are going to be a lot of people walking up and down Downing Street who even devoted Daily Politics viewers may never even have heard of. But for the Tory party and for the sort of succession and renewal of the next generation, today is very important in terms of bringing other people forward. Now, we know already that Dominic Raab has moved to housing.
And we've just seen Alex Sharma actually going through the front door. Yeah. There's Dominic Raab, who was, or has been given, as you say, the housing
yes, you may well be rather disappointed not to be in the cabinet. Some people who know him well are suggesting this morning. There's Jo Johnson, of course, also going into number 10, the current Science and Higher Education Minister.
And we don't quite know what's happening, no.
But today we will see a lot of new intake, or newish intake MPs coming into government. As many
from the 2015 as well as 2017.
Absolutely. And 10 new names that have been suggested to me, and we'll see by the end of the day, and I'm not going to read them all out, but some people who Daily Politics viewers will have seen MPs like Rishi Sunak, Lucy Fraser, Ollie Dowden, Suella Fernandez, who's a prominent Eurosceptic, Jo Churchill, who's one of the Suffolk MPs, Nusrat Ghani, again, a prominent female Brexiteer. So we will see by the end of the day if Theresa May has been able to achieve the second aim of her reshuffle, which was putting forward a new team further down the ranks. But just to close, is a quiz question. Who said in 2008, by the end of my first parliament, I want a third of all my ministers to be female?
That'll be David Cameron.
David Cameron. And Theresa May and her team, her allies today, are saying the same thing. So bringing people in the lower ranks is quite one thing, but whether that actually changes the top table in the years to come, we'll see.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Now, what were the big moves in yesterday's reshuffle? Well, the Education Secretary, as we've been discussing, Justine Greening, was the surprise departure last night when she opted to leave the Cabinet rather than be moved to a different department. She will be replaced by Damien Hinds. David Lidington moves in to replace Damien Green as Cabinet Office Minister after Mr Green was forced to resign before Christmas. He will not, however, take over the title of First Secretary of State, a position which was the Prime Minister's de facto deputy. Mr Lidington will be replaced as Justice Secretary by David Gork, who in turn vacates the Department for Work and Pensions in favour of Esther McVeigh, who returned to the Commons at last year's general election. Patrick McLaughlin handed over the mantle of Conservative Party chairman to Brandon Lewis, and Northern Ireland Secretary James Brokenshire stood down citing health reasons and will be replaced by Culture Secretary Karen Bradley. Matthew Hancock gets his first cabinet post by taking over her department. Jeremy Hunt refused to move from the Department of Health and adds extra responsibility for social care to his brief. And Community Secretary Sajid Javid also adds housing to his title. The remaining cabinet lineup remains unchanged, with Amber Rudd staying at the Home Office, Boris Johnson as Forest Secretary and Philip Hammond as Chancellor. Well, we're joined now by the new Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, James Cleverly. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Congratulations on your appointment. But this reshuffle was supposed to underline Theresa May's authority, and in fact, it seems to have undermined it. In what way has her authority been strengthened?
Well, this reshuffle was about bringing some new talent into government. We've seen that. We've seen promotions going through into cabinet, but also when
who particularly do you think is new talent that's come into the cabinet?
Well, we have a number of new women that have come into around the cabinet table who are attending cabinet for the first time. Claire is coming through into cabinet, and we're also seeing in the as Laura was saying, we've also seen in some of the less high-profile roles, particularly here at the vice chairmanships of the party, which we were discussing yesterday, a lot of new people coming through.
Right,
so
but
we're going to see new faces coming into government.
Sure, at the lower levels, at the ministerial ranks below cabinet, but at cabinet, there hasn't been the complete change that we were promised, if not at the top three positions. There hasn't been the change because Theresa May couldn't move people like Jeremy Hunt, and she couldn't persuade Justine Greening to take the position at Work and Pensions. So again, how would you judge Theresa May's authority this morning? Well,
you're saying about what was promised. I don't know who might have been promising things to you, but the decisions about reshuffles are taken at number 10, and they are kept private at number 10 until the announcements are made. Now, there's been speculation. There's been a huge amount of speculation. There always is when reshuffles come along, and it may well be that you feel that the changes haven't met your expectations.
Well,
but the point
they were the
being,
changes that we were expected because they came from people around the Prime Minister. I mean, do you think the media has been mishandled in this instance?
Well, I think there have been a lot of people in the media, and this always happens at reshuffle time, a lot of people in the media who speculate about who might be getting promoted, who might be moving, and it's always the case, and I remember a number of reshuffles where people have said, oh, that's not what we expected, as if somehow it's the fault of government. What we have around the cabinet table, you can see the picture on the graphic, we have a really good mix of experience, we've got a really, really strong team, and also what we're seeing now is people being brought up into government. And I'm really positive about these changes. Right, except the former Conservative leader Ian Duncan-Smith says Downing Street should have managed the media more carefully in the run-up to this reshuffle. Do you agree with him? No, I think that it's impossible to constantly chase the speculation. If you try and back down every single piece of speculation, you wouldn't have time to get any real work done. Well, for example, Chris Grayling was, it was tweeted out by the Conservative headquarters that Chris Grayling was going to be the chairman, and that was obviously completely wrong. Yes, and this actually proves my point. The BBC, if I remember rightly, confirmed for definite that Chris Grayling was going to be Conservative headquarters follows everything the BBC says. Conservative Party chairman, and someone took what they believed to be an authoritative source who got it wrong. And that's Did they think of calling number 10 to find out? And that's the point about always chasing the speculation. There's lots of speculation. We are never, ever, ever going to be able to chase every single bit of gossip and speculation, and it would be wrong to do so. Whose fault is it that the headlines are so awful for Theresa May and the government this morning? Well, I don't think we should be too worried about the headlines, because today and yesterday were about reshuffle, and that always causes lots of froth and drama in the media. What really is important is the delivery of government. Today's headlines are what they are. Tomorrow and onwards, we'll be getting the really important stuff, which is about what we're doing, what we're delivering in government. Right, let's talk about delivery, because if this was going to be a reboot, if you have said that this is a sort of new cabinet, although the faces haven't really changed that much, what change in policy direction can you expect then in the coming weeks from this new cabinet? Well, what we're doing is we are delivering on the agenda that the Prime Minister set out when she stood on the steps of Downing Street when she initially became leader. So there's no change in agenda, no change in terms of policies? Well, it's never about no change, but the fundamental, the philosophy behind what the Prime Minister and the ministerial team is doing in government remains the same, which is about delivering opportunity. It's about helping people get onto the housing ladder. It's about growing the employment. It's about keeping the economy on track. It's about delivering a good Brexit. These things endure because they are the fundamentals. They are the foundation stones upon which the detail is built. They will remain the same. Some of the details will change. That always happens. But the fundamentals remain the same, and they are right. Right. I mean, reshuffles are always built up in the media and in Westminster and in the bubble to some extent. This is an event for us. But do you think this has been badly handled? Well, I think there's been a pattern with Theresa May. You know, her comps people get out there and overpromise, and then her own caution chips in, and what's delivered time after time is less than anticipated. I mean, I think there's some, great people. James, congratulations on your new role. But, fundamentally, this is a reshuffle where the boys kept their jobs, and probably the greatest representative of diversity in real performance terms around the cabinet table, Justine Greening, lost hers. How much of a loss is Justine Greening to the cabinet? Well, it's never good news when you lose a good minister from government. Justine had her own reasons. I haven't had a chance to talk to her in detail. I don't know why. Well, she didn't want the work and pensions brief that she was offered. Do you think it was a loss? Should Theresa May have tried harder to keep her? Well, as I say, I wasn't privy to the conversations. It's a shame. I like Justine. I think she's a fantastic MP, and I don't know the reasons why she wasn't able to stay in government. Was she, in your mind, doing a good job in government as Education Secretary? Well, the problem with reshuffles is there is always more talent than there are seats. And that is, reshuffles are not easy. They're not meant to be easy. Sure. But my question was she doing a good job? Yes, I do think she was doing a good job. The question is always, is there someone that might do a better job? Might she be better deployed doing a different job? These are the kind of questions. So it's not about Was it a good job, yes or no? Because I think she was doing a good job. But there are a myriad of complicated moving parts in a reshuffle, and they all interplay, and that's where the decision.
How do you think it looks when there have been promises made by Theresa May about wanting to have a cabinet, a government that better reflects society at large, when you lose someone like Justine Greening, who was comprehensively educated and obviously a campaigner in terms of gay rights, leaves the government in that way, and in terms of the number of women, there's been no net increase in women in full cabinet posts?
Well, as I say, the changes to the cabinet, I think, are taking us in the right directions. I mean, we see that we have now.
But there are no more women in full cabinet posts.
No, we have 10 women attending cabinet, and there has got to be a degree of stability in the cabinet. We're in government. This is not one of the Labour Party's Mickey Mouse shadow cabinet reshuffles. These are people running departments, and you've got to have a degree of stability. But we do have a fantastic mix of people. Again, we've got Esther McVey now has come into cabinet. If you don't think she represents an increase in diversity, I think you'd be very wrong in that.
And do you think she'll be compassionate in her role at the Department of Work and Pensions?
Yeah, I think she will be, because from what I know of her, and I don't know her as well as some of the colleagues who served with her previously, she is absolutely passionate about delivering the kind of things that we are all passionate about, which is lifting people out of hardship, giving them opportunities in life.
Although she was very criticised by disabled people and the disability lobby for her work when she was in that role in the last government.
Very aggressively and very nastily targeted by people like John McDonnell et al., who used some very appalling and violent and misogynistic language against her. I'm not suggesting disability rights campaigners, but I think that unfortunately fueled a bit of a hue and cry.
Although the criticism from disability rights campaigners preceded the comments made by John McDonnell.
But I know when she previously worked in the Department of Work and Pensions, she was absolutely passionate about using her role in that department to help bring people on in life, help them get on in life, and I think she'll be absolutely fantastic in that role.
All right. Let's move on to the party itself, because this is the role that you are going to be given. Do you think that this reshuffle was more about developing the party, about the next election, than it was actually about government policy, and hence the ranks have been swelled by the likes of you and your colleagues at the party level? Well,
I think there is always a balance between the work of government and how the mechanics, the party machine works. And they both need to work. A good party machine helps government deliver, and a government delivering helps us win elections.
And has the party machine been failing because, obviously, of what happened in the last election?
The party machine delivered the highest vote in a generation.
How many members has the party got?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know at the moment.
Why don't you know? Why is it so difficult to get numbers of Conservative Party members from anybody in the Conservative Party?
Because we are in the party, as we believe, our philosophy in government is we believe in decentralisation, we believe in autonomy, we believe in all those kind of things, which means that the party membership is owned at the constituency level, and it's not that easy to compile up-to-date and accurate figures. But the more important point is that the party machine is a good machine, and it did well at the last general election. The Labour Party did very well, and so sometimes the success that we achieved is slightly overshadowed and hidden. But it's about building on that success and making sure we are absolutely ready to go into the local elections in spring of this year, and other elections, and ultimately the general election in 2022.
John Strafford of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy, whom you will know, has been there a very long time, said he'd heard from local party sources that the membership could be as low as 70,000. Now, below 100,000, that would make the Conservative Party the fourth largest party, behind the Liberal Democrats, behind the SNP, and certainly behind Labour. Can you win an election on that number of members?
Well, I've just said I now work at Central Office, and I don't have the figures at my fingertips. So
would you be worried would you be worried about those? I mean, he is a man who's on the ground. He's worked at grassroots Tory level for years.
Well, so John can't know what the figures are. He may be speculating. It could be an educated guess. The point I'm making is whatever the membership is, whatever the functions at CHQ, at Central Office, have been, at the last general election, we delivered the largest vote share and the largest number of votes in a generation. So I'm not saying it's perfect, of course it's not, and there are things to do, but it is a good organisation and it's working well. Our job is to make it work better.
Will you publish the figures? Grant Shapps, former chairman, said the figures should be published when you have them.
Look, I am the deputy party chairman. That will be the kind of decision that need to be signed off by my boss.
But do you think they should be made public? Should we know them?
There are reasons to and fro. I mean, members are not the only thing.
No.
We have a huge number, and we've seen this, a huge number of supporters and activists. For whatever reason, aren't party members. They don't necessarily want to sign up to be party members. And I don't think we should disregard their contribution just because they don't actually put their signature on the form.
Mark Malibran, we've focused quite a lot on Justine Greening, and we've talked a bit about the diversity, and perhaps the Conservatives, Theresa May's government, hasn't reached the aspiration of what she might have wanted. But Esther McVey is a new cabinet minister, a woman in the Department of Work and Pensions. Do you welcome that?
Well, she knows a bit about unemployment, having lost her seat. But yes, of course. I mean, I don't know her at all, but it's great to have her there. I think, though, the fundamental point which you've just, we're pressing James on, I mean, this is a party which is shrinking. It's smaller than a lot of NGOs. There are NGOs looking after historic houses or animal rights that are bigger than this. A modern social media movement like Avaz has 1.7 million members. So this is a shrinking party which increasingly is out of touch, I would argue, with the changing politics of our country.
But polled in terms of vote share, little like the Labour Party, but obviously slightly bigger because they did win the election, albeit losing the majority, at around 40–42%.
Well, the remarkable thing was the two main parties had a bigger share of the vote than they'd had in a generation, which I think is a last hurrah as politics begins to fundamentally realign around the new agendas out there.
Theresa May has appointed more women and MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds as ministers at the end of a two-day reshuffle designed to recharge her government. Our deputy political editor John Pienaar has more.
Allowed through the door at number 10 today for a quick peek at the new look cabinet. Nobody moved. Almost nobody moved yesterday because Theresa May couldn't make them. Where is she? There she is. Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, was in the way and wouldn't budge, just like yesterday. The new faces in the top team were happy enough, though.
There's lots of energy, there's lots of ideas. It was a really important meeting this morning and a sense of renewed vigour.
And the losers?
I did what I thought the right thing to do was. Thank you.
Justine Greening, now ex-Education Secretary, had no regrets. She wouldn't switch jobs. Now she's jogged off.
You've got to be careful about, who you alienate. So
you can't make too many enemies.
No, you can't, and that's the simple truth of all reshuffles. But I do actually think that the Prime Minister has balanced it very, very well. We've got some stability at cabinet level, but we've got some new blood coming through into the other layers of government. So I think the balancing act she's got right.
Bringing the Tory party closer to people was today's mission, making government look more like the electorate and somehow retrieving old loyalties that were jumped by potential voters.
Excited about the prospect of joining the government?
Very. So, for those judged the brightest and the best, the guessing game was over.
You live in hope in these days. Are you pleased with your new job?
They left number 10 happier than they went in. Some couldn't bear to wait for the official announcement before passing on the news.
Congratulations, what have you got?
I'm going to be in the deputy department.
Altogether, 14 MPs were given jobs, 8 of them women and 5 from ethnic minorities. Meanwhile, another plan went wrong today. Toby Young, appointed to the board of a new university regulator, resigned under pressure. He'd helped set up free schools, but past inflammatory comments and tweets forced him to step down before he could start his new role. An embarrassment to the government, but a relief to critics, including Tories.
Clearly, due diligence wasn't done. I made it clear I thought it was the wrong thing to do because of some very extreme things that Toby Young had said in the past on eugenics, on the disabled and on the way he described working class people.
Newly appointed and promoted ministers are looking happy tonight. They always do. But this reshuffle, the ministers Theresa May couldn't move or sack, has been much a mark of her political vulnerability as the sign of strength her party wanted. Tory MPs can only hope for a tighter grip at the top in what will be a defining year. British politics is as volatile as it's been in modern times. Unpredictability, the new normal. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Theresa May tonight hailed her new cabinet a gifted new generation and said her government looks more like the country it serves. 8 women and 6 men were among those promoted to mainly junior roles, including 5 from ethnic minorities. Others, they were less kind. Labour branded the Prime Minister's reshuffle a lacklustre PR exercise. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Theresa May's brand new cabinet met for the first time this morning. Although most weren't new, some had just swapped seats and a couple refused to take up new jobs. Rather than run the Work and Pensions Department, Justine Greening quit government altogether.
I did what I thought the right thing to do was. Thank you.
So this morning, all she was left running was off down the street. The seat she could have had at this morning's meeting went to the recently re-elected former TV presenter and former Disabilities Minister, Esther McVey.
There's lots of energy, there's lots of ideas. It was a really important meeting this morning and a sense of renewed vigour.
The reshuffle also worked out well for Matt Hancock, newly promoted to Culture Secretary.
I thought the reshuffle was excellent yesterday.
But most of the senior ministers went unchanged, and so broadly speaking did the look of the cabinet.
The new cabinet isn't really any more diverse than the cabinet was yesterday, is it?
Well, it is. There's 2 more women around the cabinet table this morning to what there was at the last cabinet meeting. And of course, this is a government with a prime minister, a female woman prime minister in Theresa May, a female home secretary, a brilliant home secretary I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 18 months. And of course, in our vice chairman, we've got women in there, people from diverse backgrounds right across the country and from all different backgrounds.
This afternoon, the junior ministerial pack was reshuffled. The Trade Minister, Mark Garnier, was fired despite recently having been cleared of allegations of sexual harassment. And Universities Minister Joe Johnson was moved to Transport, just hours after the man he'd appointed to the university's regulator, Toby Young, himself resigned over a series of offensive tweets. A number of rising stars like Rishi Sunak and Suella Fernandez were given new ministerial jobs today, but overall there has not been the breadth of change that was expected.
None of the large jobs have changed. She hasn't dared move the big people that she really ought to be thinking about moving. She hasn't got the fresh blood. She hasn't got rid of the dead wood. And where are the new ideas and where is the diversity?
This evening, the Prime Minister said the government now looks more like the country it serves. But the same cannot be said of the cabinet, which hasn't really changed all that much. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, our political editor Robert Peston is in Downing Street for us now. So, Robert, the reshuffle is now complete. What do you reckon? Was it worth it?
Very good question. As you've heard from Carl, yes, at junior levels of government there's some new talent, including representatives from ethnic minorities, a few more women. The junior levels of the government look a bit more like the country at large, which is what the Prime Minister wanted. But the cabinet itself, well, according to research from the Sutton Trust, a few more people from fee-paying schools, a few more Oxbridge graduates, not really like the country as a whole. And you should not forget the grief that the Prime Minister has personally suffered as a result of the reshuffle, being snubbed by 2 ministers at a senior level who she wanted to move. Now, tonight I spoke to a number of ministers and asked them, well, what was the point of all of that? They all laughed, and one came up with the immortal line, "It's too secret to tell you, Robert."
Robert Peston in Downing Street, thank you.
The reshuffle is over, Downing Street has said in the last few minutes. The nation can relax and aspiring MPs can stop checking their messages. Theresa May's planned changes were billed as a stride towards making her team more reflective of the country she governs. More women, more ethnic minorities, and inevitably fewer white men. The second day of the shuffle has focused on junior ministerial roles, but does managing the precarious balance of Remain and Leave supporters in the top team leave the Prime Minister's hands tied? Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
Afternoon, Ms Fernandez.
This is how Number 10 wants this reshuffle to be seen. A moment when the Prime Minister brought in new faces, many of them women, into government. But these were new middle and junior ranking ministers. And number 10 knows it's the bigger cheeses at Cabinet, summoned by the Prime Minister to pose for the cameras today, who are really in the spotlight. And the newly reshuffled Cabinet, meeting this morning, looked an awful lot like the one that met last week.
Overall, I think it could have been a bit more bold and ambitious, and I think there were other changes that could have been made as was billed in advance. And having billed it as that, I think people would probably view it as a bit of a damp squib in the end.
I wonder if you could explain why you didn't take the job with the DWP.
I did what I thought the right thing to do was. Thank you.
One face not at the Cabinet table today, the former Education Secretary Justine Greening, who left the government rather than take another job. Theresa May was said to be unhappy with her commitment to school standards. Ms Greening said she'd campaign for social opportunity from the backbenches. Theresa May said she wanted a government that looks more like the country it serves. As well as 8 new women ministers, 5 are from ethnic minorities.
The big change is going to take place with Theresa May's ministerial setup will eventually feed through to Cabinet. So I think in a couple of years from now you will see many more people with ethnic backgrounds, more women, many more women involved in Cabinet, and a greater reflection of what is essentially a remarkable intake in the 2015 intake who have come in so far.
Today, the junior ranks are meant to be full of the 2010, 2015, 2017 intake, and yet people are labelling it, oh, and here's the diversity bit. So if you are black and you are a young male in the Conservative Party, you should be there because you are really doing well and proving your job, and you should be welcomed into that role as a result, not because of the colour of your skin. And I think that some of this kind of briefing in advance about how you're seeing new, different faces backfires. We're over that now. It's like 1980s.
Mr. Joe Johnson.
Yesterday, the Universities Minister spent an hour defending the appointment of Toby Young to the board of the new university regulator. But Mr Young, under attack for offensive tweets and articles, resigned overnight. And then the Universities Minister Joe Johnson found himself shuffled out of that job. It was one of a handful of switches in the middle ranks that left some observers puzzled. A day after a cabinet reshuffle left them underwhelmed. As well as some head-scratching about why the rather donnish Joe Johnson has moved from universities to transport, there's another one that people keep talking about. Rory Stewart, very much a foreign policy expert, comfortably embedded at the Department for International Development, looking into Africa strategy, has now been shunted off to look after prisons. When you ask number 10, they say the Prime Minister is confident everyone will perform well in the jobs they've been given. When the Cabinet turned up today, they had a document in front of them on the table they probably weren't expecting to see. It was a redrafted version of the ministerial code that governs behaviour, and it was put there because it's been changed. The Prime Minister's told them to go off back to their departments, make sure all the new ministers, everyone in the government reads this, signs off on it, sends it back to her. That's their homework before they even look at their departmental briefs. And the key change in it is this. There's a new phrase in there saying that harassing, bullying or other inappropriate or discriminating behaviour wherever it takes place is not consistent with the ministerial code and will not be tolerated. And number 10 is saying that's been put there because the Prime Minister and officials, I believe, when they were looking into complaints about ministerial behaviour recently, felt that the existing code didn't govern certain bits of behaviour which they don't want to see ministers performing. Overall, you have to say that there is some new blood in today. There's always a risk when you do that because the Prime Minister has had to throw out some older blood. And it quite often happens, Theresa May has been in the House of Commons long enough to know this, that some older white male MPs who've been thrown out of office can discover a rebellious streak they were previously unaware of when they're on the back benches. That's a risk she knows she runs. She's tried to minimise it. She's been the cautious Theresa May overall that we've really, on the whole, apart from that surprise election, come to know.
Gary Gibbon, back here in Britain. Let's go back to the House of Commons. Conservative MP and newly appointed Junior Education Minister Nadhim Zahawi joins us. Congratulations on your elevation. Sad day for us because you've been one of the few MPs who we could guarantee would come out and talk to us. So perhaps this will be the last time for a bit. Now,
thank you very much, John.
What did Justine Greening do wrong, do you think, that lost her the job of education? Did you notice anything going wrong in education?
I think Justine has done a tremendous job. My first day in the department, you see the tremendous work that she's undertaken to deliver fantastic results with Nick Gibb on English because of the phonics revolution, doing the same in mathematics, the work we've done on apprenticeships. Justine wants to spend a lot of time actually effectively doing the work around social mobility in Parliament, in the Chamber. Clearly, look, any reshuffle can have winners and losers, but at the end of the day, what the Prime Minister's done is put more women into the Cabinet, more women in ministerial roles, more people with backgrounds like mine in ministerial roles. Someone who was born in Baghdad to immigrant stock to this country is now a minister in the Department of Education. So I think it's much more reflective of the country. I'm sorry to see Justine go, and I'm sure she's going to do a great job in the Chamber, championing all those things that she feels so passionately about.
But what is curious is this is a Prime Minister who sacked George Osborne, then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in a matter of seconds, and yet took 2 hours to fail to convince Ms Greening to leave voluntarily and to take up another post.
Well, look, I don't know, I'm not privy to the details of those conversations. All I can say to you is from what I've heard from Justine herself is she's passionate about the social mobility agenda. She's going to deliver that. But when you talk about some of the changes in the Cabinet, I came from a commercial world. I was the founder of YouGov, as you know, John. And as Chief Executive, if you listen to your Managing Director, when he says to you, as Jeremy Hunt did, look, I want to integrate social care and healthcare, which is a big integration. And you say, look, actually, I'll give you a chance to do that. In the commercial world, that tends to be commended. Somehow it's seen as a failure in politics. I don't think it is. I think what the Prime Minister's done has built a team that's fit for purpose, not just for the next day or the next week or the next headline, but for the next 4 years to deliver on her domestic agenda. She wants to see every child have an opportunity to go to a great school. 1.9 million more students now go to good or outstanding schools than when we took office. She wants to see people who want to get on the housing ladder, 300,000 homes to be built a year by Sajid Javid and Dom Raab in that team. And of course, all of us breathe clean air. Yeah. If we can deliver on that agenda, this is the team that she's put together that's fit for purpose for the next 4 years.
Well, you said you came from the corporate sector. It's true that you've had to make terrible sacrifices in order to become a minister. I mean, back in December, you had to forego several £100,000 worth of business with another corporation, etc. It's not a cheap business, is it?
Well, I was elected as the member of Stratford-on-Avon in 2010. I said to my constituents that I want to serve in the team in the government to make our country a better place, a place where every child has the opportunity, an immigrant child that has the opportunity to go to a fantastic university like University College and build a great business like YouGov PLC.
So let's look at the portfolio. Let's just look at your portfolio for a moment.
I took a pay cut. I took a massive pay cut.
You sure did. You sure did. Although some people will raise eyebrows that you were able to earn that amount of money outside the House of Commons whilst being an MP.
Well, I think it's healthy for MPs to have outside interests and outside experiences, whether doctors or nurses or QCs, lawyers, or entrepreneurs like I am. And I think it was right that I was able to deliver for UK PLC, not just for Parliament. But I'm pleased to take a pay cut and to do this job. I'm very proud. I came to this House to serve in government. I'm just pleased that Theresa May, I'm over the moon.
I can hear the division bell going. I know you've got to go and vote, but very briefly, more grammar schools, more faith schools under you?
I want to see more academies, more good schools, more schools that are delivering an opportunity for every child in our country. In 4 years' time, judge us by that outcome, higher standards in English, in mathematics, and making sure that every child has the opportunity to go to a great school, a good or outstanding school in their area. That's what your viewers will want to deliver for them. And of course, the housing agenda and the environment.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure, John.
It's done. After 2 days, government has been reshuffled and reshaped. 124 jobs in government, including junior ministers and whips and all, the hangers-on. And about a third of those have been moved or are new, including moves for some names you might recognise. Joe Johnson and Rory Stewart, who were shunted from jobs in their comfort zone to jobs elsewhere. Well, two important critiques of the reshuffle are emerging, though. The Prime Minister has said that it makes government look like the people it serves. It's not quite true of the Cabinet, which is a little more public school and a bit more Oxbridge than it was, and incidentally has no more women in the main full Cabinet. The other point made by the Institute for Government is about the disruption to business. In nearly every department, half or more of ministers have now been in their post for less than a year. The heart of government, which is the Cabinet Office, will have an entirely new team. For what? Was it all worth it? Well, Nick Watt, our political editor, is here. I mean, Nick, let's talk about the handling today, because yesterday, of course, came under quite a bit of criticism.
Well, it really has been a tale of two reshuffles. There is a feeling in the Cabinet that yesterday, which was about the Cabinet, really was not one of the Prime Minister's most glorious moments, with those ministers resisting her. I've been hearing words like scathing words. It was chaotic. The Prime Minister has no authority and she can't even sack people. That's the Cabinet. Today, she had a much better story when she started moving through the junior and the middle ranks of the government. And Downing Street are saying that the Prime Minister has created what they believe is one of the most diverse governments in the history of this country. 37 women ministers and 9 ministers from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And I was talking to one cabinet minister who said, just look at the Whip's office. I think it's 6 recently elected women MPs brought into the Whip's office. They were saying it's not that long ago that there were no women in the Whip's office. It was run like a military operation. Orders were barked. You can't do that in the modern world, so this is a modern Whip's office.
Right. There were some strange moves. I mentioned Rory Stewart and Jo Johnson. And people say, why move them from jobs that they seem to be, you know, au fait with, to things that are kind of quite outside their expertise?
Well, true followers of Machiavelli are spotting a plot on the backbenches. And what they're saying is that in her cabinet reshuffle, what the Prime Minister did was created a Praetorian guard around her and then clipped the wings of anyone who might possibly be seen as a potential challenger. So Dominic Raab, given this very important job as housing minister, but that is seen by these people as a hospital pass, will he really ever get to grips with this issue that nobody seems to be able to get to grips to? Rory Stewart taken out of the comfort zone of Africa to the Ministry of Justice. This is somebody who made his name as a governor of an Iraqi province. And then Justin Greening, a comprehensive educated Yorkshire woman, given an offer yesterday that she couldn't take, and off she goes. So I've really been looking at what Theresa May was trying to achieve in this troubled reshuffle. Most Prime Ministers are reluctant butchers. Margaret Thatcher lamented how in her Downing Street years she had been obliged to learn the craft of carving the joint. So just how skilled a butcher is Theresa May? Well, in this rather elongated reshuffle, she's been struggling with a pretty tough joint, and that is raising questions about her mastery of some pretty basic prime ministerial skills. If Prime Ministers dread reshuffles so much, what exactly is Theresa May seeking to achieve here? Well, the answer lies in one date, June the 8th. The Prime Minister is seeking to respond to the Tories' surprise electoral setback by shifting the dial in 3 ways. In the first place, she wants to restore her own political authority. Then, she wants to show a more diverse Conservative Party to the country. And finally, she wants to respond to the concerns of voters who gave the Tories such a bloody nose back in June. The Prime Minister gave the impression yesterday that she was unable to carve key sections of the joint after cabinet ministers challenged some of her plans. Tory MPs claim that the reshuffle has exposed grave weaknesses in her operation, though MPs now say she did stage a strong recovery today.
Expectations were far too high on the run-in, because I always think it was going to be a moderate reshuffle, because there's only 2 or 3 jobs needed changing. Every reshuffle I've ever seen hits a problem somewhere when a minister doesn't want to go somewhere and they want to keep them in the cabinet, which happened here.
Suella Fernandez, who has coordinated the main backbench Brexit group, takes her first step on the ministerial ladder in the Brexit department. Other new ministers include the QC Lucy Fraser, who becomes a Justice Minister, and the former entrepreneur Rishi Sunak, who joins the Housing Ministry. The Prime Minister invited the record number of women appointed to the Whip's office to Downing Street. Number 10 says Theresa May has created one of the most diverse governments ever, with 37 women and 9 ministers from minority ethnic backgrounds.
Probably is the most diverse government Britain has ever had. I think that is a good thing. But what I think is more important is look at, the reshuffle's pretty much over now, senior cabinet level right the way through to junior ministerial roles. We've got some really good, high quality people.
The Tories were shaken by the way in which voters from their mid-40s downwards preferred Labour in the election. With concerns over housing a key grievance amongst younger voters, there is a renewed focus on this in a newly rebranded department. All age groups in that election were also alarmed by the confusion over social care, so Jeremy Hunt takes overall control of that policy. The challenge will be to show that these changes amount to more than shiny new departmental nameplates. While the Prime Minister has been panned for tinkering with her cabinet, in this reshuffle she has gone further than the limited changes she made in the summer. So progress since her midsummer nightmare when her first priority was survival. But this is still not Theresa May's ideal reshuffle. Had she done better in the general election, there would have been changes at the most senior level of the cabinet. The Prime Minister tied up the loose ends of her reshuffle this evening. The troubled cabinet changes show Theresa May cannot altogether escape the shadow of the election. But at junior levels, there was a more decisive Prime Minister on display.
Nick, what there with an Atkins diet metaphor as well. Well, I'm joined by Kelly Tolhurst, the Tory MP for Rochester in Kent, and as of today, an assistant government whip, one of those ones that Nick was referring to a bit earlier. And in a moment, I'll be speaking to Camilla Cavendish, director of the 10 Downing Street Policy Unit under David Cameron, and to the journalist Paul Mason. Very good evening to you all. Kelly, can we just start with you? Because it's quite interesting that they've actually put you up. The government have chosen to put you up to speak for the government today. Working class background, not one of these Oxbridge posh boys in the cabinet. Do you think this is a time for the party to try and sort of put forward a different face for itself?
Well, I think for me, I'm a Conservative, always have been. I've become a Conservative MP, and for me, I think the last 2 days, especially what's happened today, has shown really what the true Conservative parliamentary party now is, and they do include people like myself, and it's been really good to be given the opportunity to go into the Whip's office this afternoon.
Right. I mean, Theresa May explicitly said one of the objectives and achievements of this was to create a government that looks more like the country it serves. Last count, there were more than 35% women in the country. Are you happy with the way that's gone?
Well, I think we have got record numbers for us, women into government positions, and that is more reflective of the people we serve. It's true we need to do more, but I think today is a great step forward, and I think with what's happened in the Whip's office is a real indicator to show that's changing.
I mean, it is in fairness to Whip's office, you don't really get to speak on any issue in the Commons. Cabinet average age, 51, it's now 51, it was 52, not much change. In the Cabinet, there's one black or ethnic minority member of the Cabinet. 48% Oxbridge, 34% went to a public school. Does it make sense to sort of shout about how you're creating a government that looks like the country it serves if you've got sort of 34% public school people in the Cabinet, 48% Oxbridge? Is that a thing to shout about?
Well, I think we need to look at the government positions as a whole and also look at the people that came in 2015 and have come in this year. And myself, having not been to university and had the opportunities to work hard and to become a Member of Parliament, there are more people like me that came in 2015. And I think if you look at us as a whole, we are from a more diverse background. Therefore, I do think some of the changes are reflected and represented.
Is your line, this will pass through, that the Conservative Party at the moment is boasting around a government that is, boasting about its government's representativeness when it's half Oxbridge and a third private school. But is your point that it will become more because the lower ranks are coming through? That must be.
Well, I think the parliamentary party has changed significantly in the last 2 years with the 2015 intake and 17, and I think that today's appointments have made a difference.
Good.
And I think we're moving forward.
The big mission. This is about rejuvenating this government. We know Brexit has to be done. We know Theresa May wants to move beyond Brexit. In a couple of sentences, what is the big idea? What's the kind of, apart from Brexit, what are you going to do?
Well, the government is committed to delivering Brexit. That's massively important.
Apart from Brexit?
Well, my constituents, and it is still the focus, but also what we have said, and Theresa May has been very clear, we can't forget the domestic agenda. Right. And there are things like the NHS,
So what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Well, one of the things we are doing is focusing, as you know, we've been speaking about the NHS and the winter crisis over the last couple of days. We've got it's something we're looking at. And
Kelly, I'm so sorry. But speaking about the NHS, isn't it? So you're struggling to say what the big mission is. There must be some sort of. Has the party been told, you know, this is what our priority is, reinventing capitalism and we're going to do these 100 things, or we're going to build a powerhouse in the north? I mean, saying, well, we're going to talk about the NHS, it's not it, is it, really?
Well, it's one of the things that matter to the people of this country. And one of the things about this cabinet reshuffle has been about having the reshuffle and being very clear. The Prime Minister's been very clear about what she wants to deliver. It's not just Brexit, absolutely, but it is still the main focus. But it is around working towards those things that matter to people domestically.
Right. But you can't say, I mean, with the greatest respect, I've tried giving you a chance to say what the mission is. And the fact that you're sort of struggling to say what it is, well, or am I just being unfair?
Well, I think maybe you're being unfair. I think we have been clear about what we want to do. You know, there are key things. You know, we can listen for you. We need to make sure that the economy continues to grow. We want people to be getting opportunities to have better paid jobs. We've had the industrial strategy just recently announced. You know, that's massively important for certain areas of of the United Kingdom and the economy. The NHS is included in that. Okay. There are a number of things that we have been clear, and our Prime Minister has been very clear about, and I think the last 2 days and the changes that have been made will hopefully drive that forward.
Please, stay there. Let me turn to my other two guests, because the big question is, does this reset the Conservative Party, give it a direction and get its mojo back, Camilla?
No. I think today, as Kelly said, was better than yesterday. I mean, what this reflects is we have a Prime Minister leading a minority government. She was never going to be able to do a big reshuffle. Why on earth it was briefed that she was, we can come to. But they have to fill in the gaps on the domestic policy agenda. They have to make good on the speech she made at the beginning of all this on the steps of Downing Street about social justice, about the just about managing. That means they have to do much more on housing. It would be great if they could integrate the NHS and social care, which is an enormous ambition. They need to finish rolling out universal credit. There are a whole series of unfinished things that need to be done, and partly because of Brexit, but partly, I think, because of drift, Whitehall has been virtually frozen for 18 months. And the question about this reshuffle is, can some of these people, and some of the more junior people are really good, and there are new faces coming on, who I know and I think they're very good, but can they unfreeze the system, or is the shadow of Brexit going to loom over everything else?
Paul, do you think it makes a difference?
Well, look, I congratulate Theresa May for appointing a diverse junior layer of the cabinet. There are some excellent people in there. But I think what they're about to find out is not only how little power you have as a junior minister, but how hard it is to get things done if you are not part of that inner elite that runs Britain, from which the core of the front bench is drawn, that 35% Oxbridge public school set of people. They don't just wield political power, they wield social power. And the whole Toby Young episode...
So Paul, this is like the BBC, right?
Well,
35% occupied public school? What are the figures?
We did a survey on this programme, and it was worse when I worked here. But look, the whole Toby Young thing, leave aside him and his merits, it was an attempt by Joe Johnson to kind of stick it to student unions and to have a good go at them, a la Donald Trump and Breitbart, to have a go at them on the right-wing agenda. And look, that's the agenda of the kind of elite Tory party that we're dealing with. And welcome to reality for all those black, ethnic minority and women who want to bring the normal world into that
you've raised a
Tory world. I'm sorry. It's not that complicated. It's a class system.
Paul, but can I just butt in on that, actually, because that's not the party that I recognise. That's not the Parliamentary Conservative Party that I joined in 2015. I don't recognise your sort of analysis of it. as a backbencher, I've had many of opportunity to influencing from within.
Which clubs do you remember?
Anyway, we can get into. I don't want to only talk about the patrician versus other parts of the Tory party. Camilla, the handling of the reshuffle. The kind of the fact that it was seen to be botched yesterday. Was it botched? I mean, what does it tell us about the Downing Street operation?
Well, there's a famous story, which I'm sure you guys know better, about Tony Blair. There was a guy whose name I've forgotten, whose name was on a post-it note, moving around the whiteboard, and the glue came off, and his name fell on the floor, and he never got into the cabinet because his name fell on the floor. Right. So reshuffles are famously peculiar and arbitrary and all of that. That said, the media management was a bit surprising. I mean, Theresa May as Home Secretary, I always rather admired. She didn't have much time for the press, and she didn't like the grid, and she didn't like all this slick presentational stuff. The problem is, when you get into number 10, you need to do the stuff properly. So, unfortunately, they oversold the idea that big beasts would be moved, and this would be a huge clear out for the new generation. She hasn't brought in Tugendhat, she hasn't brought in Mercer, who are two regarded in the Conservative Party as future leaders, and so it looks a bit limp.
Where does Theresa May go from here, Paul? I mean, what are you thinking?
Look, the problem she's got is it's an administration, and you need an overarching moral purpose, even if you haven't got one big idea. The problem she's got is she can't write the big idea down, which is what does Britain look like after Brexit, because the cabinet would then split. But you can do a lot more if you've got a kind of moral purpose. And I think
she had one when she arrived. Or it sounded like she did.
But the problem is identifying just about struggling people, just about managing people, isn't identifying what you are going to do for them. And right now, we all know, you're absolutely right to raise the NHS. It's the thing on everybody's minds. And the thing on everybody's minds is a guy who's overseen the cancellation of 115,000 non-urgent operations was reappointed with more power because Theresa May didn't have enough power to sack him. And that's, I mean, insofar as people are seeing politics, nobody's obsessed with who's junior this or that minister, but they are quite worried about their relatives being left on trolleys and made to sit in waiting rooms, and the person responsible for that was promoted.
Jeremy Hunt didn't cancel those 115,000 operations, Paul. That was done by NHS England because of the huge pressures
NHS England is the sort of human shield for the government, isn't it?
But I mean, the irony of all this is, of course, because of the Tories Act in 2012, Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary, has less power, in fact, than he should have done.
Yeah, for sure.
But the answer has got to be, you've got to integrate the NHS and
absolutely,
social care.
And how long have they been empowered to do that?
The question is actually whether the budget and the money will move with the title or whether it's just...
Let me ask Kelly, final point, because we have to wrap up.
Okay.
Would you like the idea of actually kind of combining, integrating health and social care? Because that was in the name they gave Jeremy Hunt yesterday, and everyone says, but hang on, is it just the name or is there something substantive going on here?
Well, it's right that change was made. There is a correlation between the two, and the two have to work together, and that's absolutely right. And I think the biggest challenge we have is, as the NHS, as the population grows, as the treatment gets better, the pressures on the NHS will continue. So it is absolutely right that going forward, we're looking at those areas combining, and the Health Secretary has the opportunity to make the changes where he feels is needed.
We really do need to leave it there. Thanks all very much indeed. Thanks.